everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this afternoon's event. My name is Shaheen from the MFest team, and we're really excited to have some incredible writers with us today. First, just a bit about MFest. MFest is a multi-arts festival of Muslim knowledge and creativity programmed by the charity Maslaha. We bring together artists, activists, thinkers, organizations, and collectives to celebrate the collective power of diverse Muslim communities, connect with our roots, and imagine thriving futures. You can read more about MFest and the wider program at mfest.org and follow us on Twitter at mfest_UK. A quick reminder of our short story competition, of which one of our writers today is a judge, so make sure you have a look at that on our website. On your screen, there's a button for questions below and links to our socials, and you can buy the book, this incredible book here above. So today's authors, we have Nadifa Mohamed, the writer of Fortune Men, which has just been released recently, in conversation with Leila Aboulela for the launch of Mohamed's new historical fiction novel, The Fortune Men. The book explores the case of Mahmood Hussein Mattan, who was unjustly executed after falsely being accused of murder and was the last man to be executed in Wales. The Fortune Men shines a light on this hidden history of a Black Muslim man subjected to a terrible injustice in 1950s Britain. And we see similar injustices resonating through time with recent racist murders of Black children like Shukri Abdi and more recently, Dear John Reed. Today's host is Leila Aboulela, who was born in Cairo, grew up in Khartoum, and moved in her mid-20s to Aberdeen. She's the author of 5 novels, Bird Summons, The Translator, a New York Times 100 Notable Books of the Year, The Kindness of Enemies, Minaret, and Lyrics Alley, which I think is my favorite, and fiction winner of the Scottish Book Awards. Leila was the first winner of the Caine Prize for African Writing, and her latest story collection, Elsewhere Home, won the Saltire Fiction Book of the Year award. Leila's work has been translated into 15 languages, and she was longlisted 3 times for the Orange Prize for Fiction. Thanks so much, and Leila, over to you.
So, hello and assalamu alaikum. Today we're going to be speaking, with an exceptional writer, Nadifa Mohamed. I met her, I first read Nadifa's writing in Granta's Best of Young British Novelists. The extract I read was about a young woman soldier in Somalia involved in the civil war. And my imagination was captured by this soldier. I pictured her like the women soldiers I grew up seeing in Sudan. I felt like I knew her. So I quickly got hold of the Orchard of Lost Souls, from which this extract was taken. And it was Nadifa's second novel, and I was completely captivated by it. The portrait of the woman soldier, Somali, African, Muslim, was so completely authentic. It will always be with me. The pressures she was under, her troubled relationship with her father, and the shy and heartbreaking romance she had with a colleague. Nadifa was born in Somaliland and came to Britain when she was 4 years old. She grew up in London and graduated from Oxford University. She has received both the Betty Trask Award and the Somerset Maugham Award, as well as numerous other prize nominations. She's a lecturer in creative writing at Royal Holloway, University of London. Today, we're going to be focusing on Nadifa's new published novel, The Fortune Men. Already reviewers are raving about it. The Observer said it confirms Mohamed as a literary star of her generation. And the Financial Times described it as a novel on fire, a restitution of justice in prose. So Nadifa, congratulations for this lovely novel. So starting from the kind of the outside going in, this is the beautiful cover, one of the nicest covers I've ever seen. It's really, really gorgeous. And look at the other side, very cool. And So the question is this him? Is this Mahmoud, the protagonist of your novel? Also, I read that the idea of the novel came to you from a photo that you saw in the newspaper. And you made a lovely book trailer, which everybody needs to go and see. It's so cool. So all these kind of visual aspects. So how did they influence your writing of the novel?
Interesting question. So this isn't Mahmoud. There are images of Mahmoud available. There's one of him in prison, a mugshot where he looks, I think, stripped of what he would normally have looked like when he was dressed up, the way he liked to dress. But this guy is, I think, a Somali man named Tall Jama, who also lived in Tiger Bay at the same time as Mahmoud, probably the same time as my dad was traveling in and out of Cardiff. So someone that they would have both known, which I find really exciting. And it was taken by a photojournalist called Bert Hardy, who did a story on Tiger Bay in 1951, so just before the beginning of my novel. And he's got so many beautiful images of the different families, the mosque, the different shops. And he was a big visual reference and almost poetic reference for me in writing the novel. And the trailer, yes. And I think the thing about the trailer is that this story, this case, has always been one that I thought I would turn into a film, into a drama. So I've always seen it visually, and I was influenced by the way that film noir executes similar sorts of stories, where there are, political aspects to it and injustices, but there's also just the atmospheric side of it, the dark alleys, the shadows and silhouettes.
That's nice, yeah. So you mentioned your father, and you mentioned that your father spoke to you about Mahmoud. So what was that like? And do you feel that in some kind of indirect way you were writing about your father and the time and his time in the 1950s Britain?
Yes, both yes and no, actually. Okay. So Mahmoud and my father knew each other. They met in Hull. In 1950, I think, when they were both living there. Mahmoud had moved there with Laura, his wife, to get away from Cardiff for a while, as she described it as the happiest time in their marriage. While my father lived in Hull for most of his time in Britain, he only moved from Hull in 1986 to bring us to England, and therefore moved to London for, I guess, maybe better opportunities than we would have received in Hull at that time. So they did know each other, but this isn't my father's story, because my father, because of his own biography, was a different man who made different decisions. But they were very close to each other. So they were almost identical when they arrived in this country, both in 1947. And then they kept making these different decisions. And my father lived peacefully, thankfully never spent any time in jail or didn't get into too much trouble with the authorities, while Mahmoud kept making mistakes. In hindsight, they were mistakes, but in his own mind, he probably thought he was protecting his pride, his dignity. He was telling the truth when other people maybe were more afraid of doing that. So I guess he was the alter ego of my father in some respects, and I found that interesting.
Yeah. So your father lived through all the what happened to Mahmoud, and did it affect him a lot? Did it?
He was at sea, so I've got my father's old seaman papers. So he was at sea. My father did the opposite in this respect as well to Mahmoud, where Mahmoud gave up the merchant navy and settled in Britain, while my dad didn't spend hardly any time on land. He became a man of the sea, constantly on the move. So I think for the 18 months around this whole case, my father was away. But the impact it had on men like my father, it was that warning bell of what happens when you put too much trust in this country, when you decide that you're going to settle and marry and raise your children here, this is what might happen to you. And many of them decided not to do that. They kept their families in Somalia. They lived these single male lives here with some freedom that they probably wouldn't have enjoyed if their families were here. But it was also a way of never fully investing in this country.
Yeah. So Tiger Bay in Cardiff in the 1950s, this amazing atmosphere, and you do conjure this up, as you said at the beginning, with this film noir. We kind of like, we're there, and it's so diverse, and there's different characters. And the woman who was murdered, she's a daughter of a Jewish immigrant from Russia.
Yes.
And one of the touching things, one of the touching details is the daughter looking through. She finds the naturalization papers of her dad when she's looking through her things, and I thought, one day this is going to happen. My children will come across my naturalization papers. So have you
thought about showing them now and talking them through that part of you?
I should do that. You're right. I should do that. I should do that. Yeah, I think they don't know about it. They might not, have actually thought about it. Yeah, but they're very casual about their British passport, and I'm like, I struggled for this. I can't, for me, it's something that I can't lose or anything like that, or even allowed to expire. They're very kind of blasé about it. Anyway, so back
I also have a certificate of naturalization because I'm not British by birth.
Yes,
so my father was a British citizen, but I have that certificate saying that I am now a British citizen when I was probably 6-7 years old. So I have less of a connection to you, but that also exists. That's also part of the archive that I will leave.
Yes, yeah. So did you have to swear allegiance to the Queen, or because
I was too young?
You're too young.
And I'm not sure if they did all of that in the 80s and early 90s. I think it's got more and more ridiculous and baroque now.
No, okay. That's so interesting. So so back to Diana and Violet. Violet was the lady who was killed, and Diana is her sister. And we do get a lot of we get an insight into Diana's life. So even though the novel really is most of it is Mahmoud's point of view, I really did like the parts with the women. This was so very rich, and you write a lot about them with sympathy. And so how did you have access to them? And how did you see them as also do you see them also as victims, or how
definitely And I think maybe that's one of the things that I didn't realize going into writing The Fortune Men, but became clear with time, is that there were two victims, or more than two victims, but the first two victims were Mahmoud and Lily. Her real name was Lily. And she's just sort of stepped over. Mahmoud's story became this big national historic miscarriage of justice, but she's an anonymous, they always described her as a 41-year-old spinster, as if that's the whole of her story. And I just thought that was so unfair. And of course, it's easy to sympathize with them as immigrants, as daughters of immigrants, as women trying to live life on their own terms, with independence, with their own financial independence. The daughter, Grace, is about to do her entrance exams for a private school, which I was doing the exact same thing at that age. That's part of the immigrant experience, I think. My father didn't go to school at all himself, but he was keen that I would get the best education as possible. And I don't think it would have been the best education possible for me, but that was his way of trying for that. So I found them very familiar. But the relationship between Jewish and Muslim immigrants, again, was a thing that I didn't know anything about in Britain. And of course, they live cheek by jowl. And in many of the accounts of Black migrants and Muslim migrants, they found some sympathy amongst Jews who'd already settled in Britain. They were the ones who had offered them housing, employment, all sorts of assistance. And that was a story I hadn't heard told before, and I thought was important to show. But at heart, I was interested in the trauma that the family were left in, the wreckage that they were left in. Mahmoud is trying to be an active part of his situation, of his, what's happening to him. He's trying to manage the situation. But Diana, she's just all hits her, and she has to try and survive.
That's true. That's true. So writing a novel involves making choices, and you could, and decisions, and you could have told this story in many different ways. You could have had thriller elements, and you even said at the beginning that it could have been a film, or you could have teased the reader with, did he kill her, didn't he kill her, or you could have speculated on the unknown killer and have him as a fictional character. So why did you choose this particular way of telling the story?
I think I did do all of those elements you mentioned, but in small ways.
Okay.
Small doses. So I did try and answer who the real killer was. I did try and create a thriller aspect and create some doubt as to whether Mahmood was guilty or not, because when you read the archives, the court transcripts and police statements, he seems very guilty. They do a good job of proving his guilt. And he also does a terrible job of proving his innocence. That was something I hadn't expected. But then we've never been in court trying to, claim our innocence for a crime, a murder that we hadn't committed, knowing that there's a death penalty at the other side of it if we don't do that. So it taught me that we don't expect people to behave the way that they should or could, in theory or in imagination. So at heart, my essence, my focus was about what was Mahmood thinking and feeling? How was he navigating this? He wasn't navigating this very well, according to the archives, but what was going on in his head that would explain some of that?
Yeah, it is very much what is going on in his head in the prison, and that's really fascinating. That's really, we go into a place that we didn't expect to go into, and you're not really shying away from any of the kind of the grisly details, or the we're right there in the center of the pain,
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah. Throughout the novel, Mahmood is not living with his wife and 3 sons. So the wife, Laura, and the children are with her parents. And both Mahmood and Laura are very young. They're a very young couple. He's really young, and you do a great job of conveying that. We never forget how young he is. So we could easily fall into the trap of thinking him as like a middle-aged, hardened, but no, he is young. He's innocent.
Yeah.
And this separation, Laura having to be with her living with her parents, it's very moving, because clearly they are in love, and it's Mahmood's life of petty crime and his inability to hold down a steady job, that is causing the problem. And
I'm not sure if that's the central problem, because they separated, first of all, when they were in Hull, and he was very ordinary. He was keeping down stable jobs in quarries and steelworks and things like that. And it's only when she left him and she took the kids back from Hull to Cardiff and moved in with her family, that his life started to fray, and he started to fray. So something happened between 1950 and his death that changed him. And I think maybe it was a feeling that this little family that he'd created and put so much effort into creating and had given up the sea for, given up the one kind of well-paying job open to him, had fallen apart. And so now he was doing all of the things that maybe he'd suppressed doing in the past. And then, of course, that kept Laura even further away from him.
Yeah.
But they had a cordial relationship, and, her feelings about everything kept changing. So the minute he was in trouble, she was there. She was on his side, running around trying to help him, speaking with the Somali community about organizing barristers and solicitors. And then after he died, and she was interviewed in 1969, she said that she wasn't in love with him, but of course he was the father of her children. And then in 1998, when they finally did clear his name, she said she was still in love with him, and he was the best thing that had ever happened to her. And it makes me emotional thinking about it, and how he treated her like a queen. And she kept imagining him coming to the door. She kept thinking he's coming back. So their relationship was very young. She was 21 when all of this was happening. He was probably in his mid-20s and had added 4 years onto his age to join the Merchant Navy. So this is who you're dealing with. You're dealing with very young people.
Yeah. That kind of like comes across. Yeah. I wanted to show you my favorite part of the novel, because that's connected to Laura. So this is when Mahmood is in prison, and and Laura and the children they live close by, right? So he can see them
across the
from the
road.
window. Yeah, that's kind of a strange coincidence, but that's
It's not a coincidence. He's staking her out. He's watching her. In modern day terms, it's a little bit creepy because he's a separated husband, but he hasn't given up on her. He wants to get her back. So it's part of a romantic gesture and a way of keeping close to the children, but he's also surveying her and keeping an eye on her.
Yeah. So he's from the prison, he waves a handkerchief. So you're saying, and they wave back. So they wave, he waves, they wave harder, he waves until it hurts. He wants to holler at them, but there is no way his voice can reach them. This fluttering white handkerchief is all he's got. It reminds him of that moment when a passenger ship is about to leave port and the travelers gather on the first, second, and third class decks to wave to the masses on the dock side. As the pilot guides the liner out to sea, you have a flurry of handkerchiefs on both sides, like falling snow, shivering until well after the ship's horn has stopped sounding, and they are so far out to sea that it looks like the ship could be slipped into a bottle. So that's so lovely.
Thank you. Thanks, Leila. And you're right. I was thinking about when the boarding house that he lives in at first, but you're talking about the prison. Yes. And by some strange coincidence, their road, Davis Street, is overlooked by the prison. Hence why they're able to wave handkerchiefs at each other from the garden.
It's so strange, these little boys growing up, and forever seeing the prison and forever, having the memory of their father being in the prison. So it's really, really, really strange.
And then being in that prison themselves as adults.
Oh,
yeah. That's one of the more tragic aspects of the whole case, is that they ended up being swallowed, these young mixed race men, growing up in extreme poverty with a single mom. They were, of course, very quickly swallowed up by the criminal justice system themselves. And during the research, someone told me that one of the sons had been put apparently in the cell that Mahmoud had been in before he was executed, as a way of taunting him.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
It's
pretty heavy.
It's heavy, yeah. So it seems from all that you're saying that this case was like a big thing. Yeah, I mean, it was a big media thing. People knew about it, and
yes and no.
Oh, it reverberated. Yeah,
it never died. It never went away. Even though the other cases, there were 4 other Black and Asian men executed in this year, and their cases did drift away out of the public consciousness. And it's partly because there was strong evidence against them. They'd committed their crimes in public or had done it against loved ones. But there was something about Mahmoud's case where it would go away and then come back and go away and come back. It never fully left, especially the Tiger Bay consciousness. So when another miscarriage of justice was in the news and being spoken about in the early 90s, people's mind quickly went back to Mahmoud's as well, and it finally became that opportunity to clear his name.
When I posted about this event on my Facebook page a couple of days ago, a couple of people told me, this case inspired Tayyip Saleh when he was writing Season of Migration to the North, and I had no idea, and I of course found that really very exciting. And so of course Tayyip Saleh did the opposite. He had a protagonist who was very cultured and very spoke perfect English, very like the opposite of Mahmoud. Yeah. And even though he was guilty, he did kill his wife, his lawyer is able to to get him off the hook and free him. So it's almost as if there was a belief at the time in this generation of people like Tayyip Saleh, who were in the 50s and 60s. I mean, he wrote Season of Migration in the 60s, that all you had to do was be educated. All that you had to do was be, speak English properly. All the things that Mahmoud didn't have. I mean, there was this belief at the time. And of course, now we see things a little bit differently. So what did you think about that?
It's interesting, and I've been trying to do some research on whether this was the case that influenced Tayyip Saleh. And there's a big difference in that Mahmoud was accused of killing a shopkeeper for money, rather than it being this an important part of Seasons of Migration, is that it's about the sexual aspects of it, the sexual jealousy, this connection between East and West and all the rest of it. And that's not Mahmoud's story, but it is the story of the other Black and Asian men who were executed in 1952. So they would be a more natural fit, I think, to be an inspiration. But the funny thing about Mahmoud is that he spoke 5 languages, he traveled around the world, he was incredibly independent. And so he thought when he went into that court, and he'd been an interpreter in courts, so he felt comfortable in that situation to a degree. So he expected to be able to talk his way out of it. And I wonder if he'd spoken proper English with a proper English accent, if that would have made a difference. And I'm not sure if it did, because another way of being given a softer ride was to be the British imagination of what a savage is. And often they would say, well, they can't, and this is why the barrister, his defense barrister, called him a semi-civilized savage. It was a way of saying he can't be responsible for his actions. They're only, they're a half child of nature. That was another thing he said. So that maybe if you were intelligent and articulate and, cultured in the way that the British respected, maybe you'd be more of a threat. So it's a difficult one to call. But Mahmoud, out of all of the other Somalis who committed acts of violence, extreme acts of violence, was the only one executed. So there was something about him that posed a danger. And I think it was not that he was too much of a worker and not posh enough or not scholarly enough. It was his attitude. He had that kind of early Black nationalist kind of resistance in him. A self-pride. That's what they found threatening, his self-pride.
That's right. Yeah, that does come across when we do see that. Okay, we're gonna not now, but in a few more minutes, 10 minutes or so, we're going to take questions from the audience. So please, if you have questions for Nadifa, do write them now. Start to write your questions for Nadifa. So I'm going to move on to a slightly different topic, and it's about Grenfell Tower. And you've written poignantly about the fire in essays and on social media. And just a few months after the tragedy, you wrote an essay entitled "What We Lost in the Grenfell Tower Fire." And the first line of that essay says, "It's hard not to imagine myself into those flats in the days and hours before the fire." And here I feel that in this essay, and especially in this first line, you're really speaking, for me, for so many of us. I also felt that I knew the people in the building. I felt, even though I didn't know them personally, and through friends of friends, they were like friends of friends. But in a way, I felt that they were like, my people. They were characters in my fiction. They were like women I had prayed next to in mosques. And for me, the fire felt like a warning. It felt like I felt that nothing could ever be the same again. Like Britain could never be the same again. And so I want to ask you about the relationship between the Grenfell fire and the Fortune Men. Is there a connection? You were writing the novel at the time of the fire, okay?
I was,
and so at what stage of the writing were you in? And the other question is, was it being immersed in the injustice that Mahmoud faced that made you more acutely sensitive to the injustice of Grenfell Tower, or the other way around, or the two things were together? Or
that's a difficult question. So to answer the first part, I must have been very close to the end of the first draft of the novel. And the novel came out quite quickly for me. It took only about 18 months to get the first draft down. And it was huge. It was 600 pages, which is, again, like these two odd things. First, I was writing quite quickly, but then also writing huge amounts. So something was happening. It was making me kind of whir away. And then I remember vividly that night. It was a warm night in Ramadan. And I saw someone talking about a fire in a tower block in West London online on Facebook. And I was quickly dismissive of any threat that might pose in any substantial way to anyone. I thought the fire brigade would be there really quickly. I've got family in tower blocks. I couldn't let myself think that anything bad would happen. And then I woke up in the morning and saw the images of the fire. And even now it gives me chills to remember what that was like. And, you know, we didn't know the numbers. People were saying 400 people were in there, 500 people were in there. I thought that someone I know might be in there. So I left work and ran to see if they were okay. And thankfully they were not in the building. But I volunteered at the Methodist church as people were starting to deliver food and clothes and all sorts of different things. And so you quickly felt immersed in what was going on. And in the days and weeks and months afterwards, when you just see what a catastrophe it was in so many different ways, where the victims' names and faces and lives start to emerge, you realize sadly how badly the fire brigade responded in some respects. You know, and I completely understand why they made the decisions they made, but it did lead to death. The state policy did lead to death. And then still, with the evidence being given at the hearings right now, and you realize just how much contempt those people were treated with, to be allowed to be forced to live in this death trap. It still boils my blood. And a similar thing, I think it's that slow decline in trust in authorities, I feel, and it's connected to learning more about what happened to Mahmood, what happens in the criminal justice system. To my shock, I think I realized I had quite a lot of trust in the authorities, in the fire brigade, in the police, in whatever, just an idea that there was a limit where they were effective and they didn't, you know, they might make mistakes, but they were responsible and reliable. And speaking to solicitors, English guys, you know, very posh English guys who have no trust in the criminal justice system really shocked me. And it made me realize I'd been maybe a bit too naive in how things work. And I don't want to lack trust in the country that we live in and in the authorities that we live under. Because my father brought us here so that we wouldn't have to deal with the nonsense that was going on in Somalia and the authorities there. But when you realize that, you know, you're not safe, you're not 100% safe. And that's what, like, the Grenfell Tower showed everyone in such brutal terms. And, you know, the family members that still live in tower blocks, I'm still afraid for them. This isn't a one-off. It's something that people in private blocks, social housing blocks, schools, all sorts of different places are not safe.
So did you stop writing, or what? I mean, you had what happened then with the book, or was that, you said you had finished the first draft? You were near the end of the first draft.
So it happened in June. Grenfell happened in June. So I was closing in on the end. I think I finished in October of that year, 2017. And then I took a long break from it, did some other things, left a publisher, found a new publisher. All of these things slowed everything down. And maybe, you know, even something not connected, such as leaving my publisher, was kind of connected to that. And that feeling that you have to be more alert and less trusting. Maybe, you know, in hindsight, that does make sense.
Yeah, no, it kind of changes things for people like us. And
Sure.
But yeah, and your novel is like that because Mahmood also trusted the legal system. You know, and you have there's a lot of scenes of quite cozy scenes, almost cozy, even though he's facing execution. They're playing chess. They're, you know, shall I make you this to eat? Shall I make you that to eat? And it's all these, so you think, oh God, you know.
But that makes it even more perverse, because those are the same men that helped the execution happen. And to me, that's the weirdest aspect. It's one thing to do it to someone you don't know, and you know, it's just a suspect, or it's just a convict with a number. It's easy to me. It's imaginatively easier to see how you could allow that person to be executed. But they had got to know him in those 6 weeks that he was in that condemned cell. So it's really depraved that he must have looked to them in some sort of appeal, because they knew him, and they carry on. They're part of the machinery of his death. But it is cozy, and I think most of our representations of the death penalty come from the US, because it's still ongoing there. And you have, you know, this belief about last meals, last suppers, and, you know, you being able to pick what you want. Or, you know, in Britain, people had a bit of they had an idea that you would be given some brandy to calm your nerves. So there's lots of myths around executions. But the reality of it is so banal, so bureaucratic, so cheap and empty. If you go to the archives, which are open to anyone can read the case notes of Mahmood Mattan's case. There's a conversation happening between the prison service and a pawnbrokers in Butte Road who want their suit back before Mahmood is hanged in it. And that was another thing that just made me think, no one cared about him. Beyond his wife and family, no one cared about him.
Yeah. And he was never able to hug them, right? They never, they wouldn't allow him to hug them. It was just this glass.
This is the 1950s, so it's still like most people in authority had come from the army. So it was very regimented, very strict, very inhumane.
No, it is, yeah. So I've got one last question before we go to the Q&A session, and so please bring, you should be writing your questions now. Okay. So in The Fortune Man, we have a universal moving story of a miscarriage of justice and a chronicle of the African diaspora, specifically the East African Somali experience. We have Black British history, British Muslim history, the British or specifically Welsh working class experience. And this is also important, very important, because the novel is great in depicting the day-to-day life of people, in debt, in poor housing conditions, and all that. It's also about the immigrant experience. And you write so well about Mahmoud's cultural sort of vertigo, his struggle with language, he's eating with his hands. He's trying to kind of guess and double guess the way white people think. Back home is always there. The mom at home, the mother writing letters to him. His memories of Africa are always there, vivid.
And more, they get more and more vivid.
And they get more and more vivid as he nears the execution. So my question, and it's the kind of question I probably don't like being asked, but it's about this. It's about classification. I mean, this thing of immigrant literature. Okay, so immigrant literature in the UK doesn't have the same sort of doesn't have the same stature maybe as it does in the US. Is this because of the focus on empire? Why do you think that in the reception of a novel like yours, certain aspects are emphasized rather than others? I mean, I haven't come across a review which mentioned immigrant literature. What are your thoughts about this? Sorry.
It's complicated, isn't it? It's difficult. I think this novel is reaching audiences that I've not spoken to before, people who read crime novels or are interested in true crime. That's not a world that I was in before. So what they bring to the conversation is slightly different and new. But what's happened more clearly with it's maybe too early to tell with The Fortune Men, but with the other two novels, it's easier to tell, is that you become the anthropologist. And British people sort of read, maybe this is a bit harsh, but they sort of read stories about immigrants as if it's like a cold medicine that they just have to quickly take in, and so they can then say, I read about those people, I've acquitted myself. But it's not something that they find great pleasure in. And maybe that's to do with the much greater number of immigrants in the US, where more people can identify with that story, while in Britain, people seem to relax into quite cozy stories about Britishness, whether that's Call the Midwife, or something about young modern women looking for love in office environments. That's the thing that people really cling to, some sort of literary comfort or pleasure. So I don't like playing anthropologist, and I don't. With Mahmoud's story, there are all of those elements that you mentioned, and he's a multifaceted character, and he's a flawed character. He's not someone who's there to make anyone feel good, least of all me as a writer. He's combative, he's challenging, I don't think he'd be an easy person to get along with in real life.
So, moody, Laura calls him.
He's very moody. He's a difficult guy. He's a charming guy, but he's a difficult guy. I think those sorts of stories about immigrants, and especially Muslim and Black male immigrants, who are still the focus of society's fears. Something like 40% of young men in prison or in detention are Black and Asian, and many of them Muslim. That's bizarre, considering how many Black and Asian and Muslim men actually live in this country. So that if there's that element of fear that plays itself out in the criminal justice system, then maybe people also don't want the humanization process that happens when you read about them, and they unconsciously distance themselves from that.
Interesting. Okay.
Just an idea.
Okay. So, questions. Oh yeah, there's questions. Okay. What actor do you think could play Mahmood in a film version of The Fortune Man?
Nice question.
Yes.
So, lots. There's not enough roles for Somali actors, so it'd be great to have a Somali actor in that role who can say all of the kha and qas and everything properly. So Barhad Addi, Somali American actor, would be fantastic, or a British Somali actor such as Ilmi Hassan Ilmi. But you never know. There's all of these people. I love films that cast non-professional actors, someone who just seems to embody a character or a role as their first go at it. But I'd love to see who would play Berlin. Berlin is probably my favorite character in the novel, who's this debonair cafe owner who was in a human zoo as a child and then stole an Arab sailor's papers and joined the merchant navy at a young age and was in Harlem in the 1920s. I love him. Maybe I'll ask Idris Elba for that one.
That would be good.
He's half Somali now because he married a Somali woman.
Okay, that's perfect. Yes. So another question. When we reflect on Mahmoud's life and given the scale of injustice, why is this story not told in schools or seared into British cultural consciousness when we think of race relations in the UK?
We know why. It's the last thing they want to be teaching, especially I think now the pushback is very overt. So there was a period of time, maybe in the 2000s, where there was an opening up of a more multicultural history. And if you were studying history or English literature, there was a desire for it to represent a more cosmopolitan idea of Britain. And now that's clearly out of the window from the government. And what they want are these kind of fantasies, these myths that just make Britain this kind of paradise and this place that has solved racism. That, even with slavery, they had that ridiculous phrasing in the report that they did into racism in the UK, where they want to almost celebrate the positives of slavery or something awful like that. So I'm not looking to the authorities now at all to showcase these sorts of stories, and we probably shouldn't ask them to, because it's too much of that. What's the phrase by Audre Lorde? You cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, to paraphrase. And the idea that we hand over these stories to the establishment, basically, and allow them to do what they've done. I think to a degree to Stephen Lawrence's history, where it becomes a triumphant one rather than a really analytical look at what happened to Stephen Lawrence, how it fitted into a wider network of police corruption, just say. These more uncomfortable questions that go beyond these awful 6 racists and how they were slowly brought to justice. The more uncomfortable questions are the interesting ones, but the authorities don't really want to even approach those, I think.
Okay.
I like that you do that, Leila.
What?
It's intimidating.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I actually admire you, because I can't say things like that. I don't know why.
Why?
I don't know. I'm kind of like shy or something. I don't know. I think them, but
I'm gobby. I've always been gobby, and I'm the youngest of 5. And I think Somali women are more gobby. than they should be. So I say what's ever in my mind. I don't tend to hold back. And I think, yeah, if everyone's thinking it, why can't we say it?
Yeah, but people like me, because I mean, I came here in my 20s, so I know I've lived in Sudan, and awful things have happened there.
Of course.
Awful things, the Janjaweed, even now, I mean, capital punishment, whatever. So I feel I'm kind of like reserved. I don't feel I can criticize. It's different if you've grown up here.
That's true. It's a luxury. It's a luxury that I've also grown up in a situation where it would take a lot for me to say something that would bring me serious harm from the authorities. And that is a credit to this country. It really is.
Okay, here's another question. And there's more coming in. Did you have to step away from Mahmood's story for your own well-being? What was your process of self-care in the process?
I think because it was it was a fast novel to write, but it was a slow novel to come to write. So it took from 2004-05 to get going, and then I started writing in 2015, and it's just been published now. So it's a really long process. So in a way, psychologically, it's been less affecting than the previous two novels, which I think I did feel something after writing those, a rawness or a pain. And I don't think I felt that this time round, but I do remember, I think the research was quite hard going when, seeing what they did to him, seeing how they bundled him into a straitjacket and threw him into a padded room. And that was unknown to me. That's never appeared in any of the newspaper reports that I'd read up until that point. Or knowing that he was executed in his pajamas, crying out for God, praying, saying his declaration of faith. These are really heartbreaking things to think about. But the novel was telling itself, and sometimes some of that pain is the difficulty of knowing how you should tell it. But in this case, it was just coming out, so I just had to follow and ride the emotions as they came up.
Yeah. No, you did. I mean, I'm a very hard-hearted reader, but I did have tears in my eyes at one point.
Really?
Yeah, I rarely ever. I'm very
my
bad.
editor and my agent are two tough women, and they both said they cried. So to me, that's a sign of I'm happy with that.
Okay. No, you should be. You should be. Okay. We need to kind of race through the last three questions because you're going to read for us.
Yes.
And we want to allow good time for that. So I'll read them all at the same time for you. Any idea what your next book will be about? How do you feel about UK publishing today? I don't envy you this question. Are you hopeful about the direction of travel for writers today? And then an easy one, any writers you'd love to shout out?
Should I tackle those?
Yes,
first?
go ahead.
So yes, I'm working on a novel right now. I'm going to take a month because I'm feeling burnt out. I think the past year has been mad for everyone, and I think in my life as well, it's been particularly difficult. So I just need to rest. But the idea is pretty clear in my head for the next novel, and it's contemporary. I seem to have this habit of going from men to women, writing about men, then women, then men, then women. So I'm now writing about women again. Somali women in London, a family, two daughters and their mother. And so it's quite spiky. There's a bigger story that I'm not sure if I want to tell anymore, which was about how violence or war follows people to a new country. And, both in terms of the trauma of it, but also sometimes the people involved in it. But at heart, it's more about what does it mean to be a Somali Muslim Black woman now, navigating love and religion, Islamophobia, class. Class is something that's not spoken about enough, and it has such a massive effect on. And you did that so well, actually, in Minaret.
Thank you.
See how that the way that you travel in class terms when you go to a new country as well. So I've said it very vaguely, but it's a contemporary story about Muslim women, Somali women in London. That's what I'm doing now.
Exciting. Exciting.
It is quite exciting, and I'm hopeful that this will be the fourth novel, so it'll be quite. I'm hoping it'll be also smooth, that it'll come out quite smoothly.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yes.
The publishing industry, I am quite hopeful. I think that some conversations that needed to be had are being had. I'm going back to what you said earlier, Leila, about not wanting to say certain things publicly. I think that there's an element of that very much entrenched in the things that are published. So they're quite cozy, even if they're dealing with racism, they're dealing with microaggressions, office microaggressions, or the awkward details of interracial romances and things like that. They're not going hard at the things that maybe we need to go hard at. So I'd like that to be something that we tackle as writers. So we're not just offering a black tinted version of another story. Which writers would I like to shout out? So I've been thinking today about meeting Alex Wheatle, the novelist, years ago. So I met him when I was working at Battersea Library, and he used to come to the reference library in Battersea Library to write. And he was the first real writer that I got to know. So he's someone I'd like to shout out.
East of Acre Lane,
Brixton Rock, Island Songs. Island Songs is a really underrated novel. It's a love song to his mother in many ways, and to Jamaica, this country that he grew up not knowing because he grew up in care in Britain. Some Somali writers, Dirie Osman, Warsan Shire, of course. So there's so many. You put me on a spot there.
Not me, the questioner.
There's a book that I would recommend, especially because this is MFest. There's a book called The Infidel Within, which was part of my research. And it's a non-fiction book about the Muslim presence in Britain since 17-something. And it's really fascinating. And it's one of the few books that looks at Black Muslim history as well. And it's The Infidel Within by Humayun Ansari. And if you're also interested in a non-fiction account of what happened to Mahmood Mattan, there's a book called Hanged for the Word If by Chris Phillips, who I worked with closely.
Okay, that's very good. Okay, so the questions are coming in. There's one question which I'll read out, and then we'll see if you have time to answer it before you go to your reading. 17% of the prison population is Muslim, and Islam is seen as a threat by the prison system, while for Muslim men, it is a way of creating community inside a punitive community. Did this aspect of religion and the prison system come through in your writing? It did, yes. But
very much so. And what's interesting is that one of the surprising aspects of 1950s Britain was that because it was a colonial power still, they were quite used to accommodating religious differences. So Mahmoud would have been offered halal food. There was a Sikh man who was executed just before Mahmoud in the same prison. And to go along with Sikh custom or traditions, he was cremated before his ashes were buried in the prison grounds in an unmarked grave, as they had to be by law. So that to me was interesting, that they were willing to accommodate his Muslimness, but he retreated deep, deep within it as a way of coming to terms with his situation, which was completely beyond his control. And this is what I have imagined to be the case, because before he was in jail, he wasn't very Muslim by all accounts. He'd stolen money from the mosque and had been charged with sacrilege for that. So he was not a good Muslim according to the community's eyes. And the Alawi society, which was the local Muslim society, refused to help him. They refused to give any funds to his defense. But his relationship to God is what I think to me, I just can't imagine him not thinking about that, not berating himself, and not thinking that there's some sort of divine justice in this. And fate, fate is a big, big word, and something that I think about a lot. And for Somalis, they often say, it's their fate that took them there. And how would you otherwise explain this young boy who was born in Somaliland, dying in a Cardiff prison. There's just all of the different routes that would have taken him there. Really bear kind of thinking about. But it was also another element of his self-pride, and there is evidence of him saying things to the prison warders about how he's the Muslim and they're infidels. They're not worth dealing with. They're not worth anything. So it was also a way of him marking himself as just as good, if not better, than these people who were keeping him captive. And he really did meet with the Imam in that last days of his life, and he told the Imam that I'm not guilty. He kept to that.
Yeah, this is very, very moving, this whole side of it. And I do, urge everybody who's listening to us now and watching to get hold of this book by hook or by crook. So.
Thank you, Leila.
I know it's hardback, but there's the library, so go.
There are the libraries.
There's Kindle copies are always a little bit cheaper, but yes.
Borrow from a friend.
Yes.
Yeah.
Share.
To do. Yeah. And actually, on that note, I got an amazing email the other day, and there's a Somali woman in New York who's offered to buy hundreds of copies for me to distribute in schools across the UK because she thinks it's so important to mark Somali history. So hopefully one of those copies will will circulate to you if you can't get it any other way.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so we love you,
Mystery
Somali
sugar,
lady in the US.
Sugar lady, sugar mama.
Okay, so we're going to now be treated to a reading. Yes.
Okay, so I'll be reading from the first chapter, Ko, which for those who don't know means one in Somali. The king is dead. Long live the queen. The announcer's voice crackles from the wireless and winds around the rapt patrons of Berlin's milk bar as sinuously as the fog curls around the mournful street lamps, their wan glow barely illuminating the cobblestones. The noise settles as milkshakes and colas clink against Irish coffees and chairs scrape against the black and white tiled floor. Berlin hammers a spoon against the bar and calls out with his lion tamer's bark. Raise your glasses, ladies and gentlemen, and send off our old king to Davy Jones's locker. He'll meet many of our men down there, replies old Ismail. He better write his apologies on the way down. He wrote them on his deathbed, a punter cackles. Through the rock and roll and spitting espresso machine, Berlin hears someone calling his name. Mahatiri, he asks, as Mahmood Mattan pushes through the crowd at the bar. I said, get me another coffee. Berlin catches his Trinidadian's wife's waist and steers her towards Mahmood. Lou, sort this troublemaker another coffee. Ranged along the bar are many of Tiger Bay's Somali sailors. They look somewhere between gangsters and dandies in their cravats, pocket chains, and shawby hats. Only Mahmood wears a Homburg pulled down low over his gaunt face and sad eyes. He is a quiet man, always appearing and disappearing silently at the fringes of the sailors, or the gamblers, or the thieves. Men pull their possessions closer when he is around and keep their eyes on his long, elegant fingers. But Dahir Gas, who was only recently released from Whitchurch Asylum, leans close to him, looking for friendship that Mahmood won't give. Tahir is on a road no one can or will walk down with him, his limbs spasming from invisible electric shocks, his face a cinema screen of wild expressions. Independence any day now, Ismail gulps from his mug and smiles. India is gone. What can they say to the rest? Berlin makes his eyes bold. They say, we've got you by the balls, darky. We own your land, your trains, your rivers, your schools, the coffee grains at the bottom of your cup. You see what they do to the Mau Mau and all the Kikuyu in Kenya? Lock them up, man and child. Mahmood takes his espresso from Lou and smirks at the exchange. He cares nothing for politics. While trying to straighten his cufflinks, a drop of coffee runs over the rim and falls onto his brightly polished shoes. Grabbing a handkerchief from his trouser pocket, he wipes it off and buffs the stain away. The brogues are new, and as black and sharp as Newfoundland coal. Better shoes than any other fella here has on his feet. 3 £1 notes burn away in his pocket, ready for a poker game, saved through missed lunches and nights spent without the fire, mummified in his blankets. Leaning over the bar, he nudges Ismail. Billah Khan coming tonight? Me? Come from the jungle. I wish I come from the jungle. I said to him, look around you. This is the jungle. You got bushes and trees everywhere. In my country, nothing grows. Ismail finishes his joke and then turns to Mahmood. How would I know? Ask one of your crooks. Kissing his teeth, Mahmood throws the espresso down his throat and grabs his fawn Macintosh before stalking through the crowd and out the door. The cold air hits his face like a spade, and despite urgently forcing the jacket around his body, the bitter February night takes hold of him and makes his teeth chatter. A grey smudge hovers over everything he sees, the result of a hot chink of coal flying from a furnace and into his right eye. A pain so pure that it hoisted him up and backwards onto the cooling clinkers behind his feet. The clatter of shovels and devil's picks as the other stokers came to his aid, their hands tearing his fingers from his face. His tears had distorted their familiar faces, their eyes the only bright spots in the gloomy engine room. The emergency alarm clattering as the chief engineer's boots marched down the steel staircase. Afterwards, 2 weeks in a hospital in Hamburg with a fat bandage wrapped around his head. That smudge and a bad back are the only physical remnants of his sea life. He hasn't boarded a ship for near to 3 years, just foundry work and poky little boilers in prisons and hospitals. The sea still calls, though, just as loudly as the gulls surfing the sky above him. But there is Laura and the boys to anchor him here. Boys who look Somali, despite their mother's Welsh blood, who cling to his legs, calling, "Daddy, daddy, daddy," and pull his head down, mussing up his pomaded hair for forceful kisses that leave his cheeks smelling of sherbet and milk. I'll leave it there.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much, Nadifa.
Thank
That's
you.
really, really, really lovely. Thank you so much. And,
Thank you, Leila.
You're welcome. And Shaheen is going to say goodbye for us now.
Thanks for everyone turning up on this sunny afternoon.
Yes.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this incredible conversation. It was just amazing to listen to. And also you spoke about Grenfell and the 4-year anniversary is coming up on the 14th of June. Yeah, so thank you for, reminding us of that as well. And I love that you said uncomfortable questions are the interesting ones, which is so true. And a reminder to everyone to either buy the book or get your local library to order it in. Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure. We've been excited about this event since we've been starting MFest planning. So. But there are so many other MFest events coming up. This evening, we've got Telling Queer and Trans Muslim Stories at 6 p.m. And tomorrow evening, we have Women's Leadership in West African Scholarship. And you can see the full lineup of events come on mfest.org. And we've got more events coming up in July, which we will be announcing soon. We also got the short story competition, with all the details of that also on our website, and Leila is one of our judges, so please get your entries in soon and share your thoughts about the season, the MFest season with us, using hashtag MFest 2021 at MFest UK, and please tag us in your posts. And thank you so much. Hope you have a lovely evening, and our next session is at 7 o'clock.